This is very, very early days, but it could be a navigational error as well. We really don't know. These are all the things that are being talked about at these very early stages. But those towers, like buildings like the Empire State Building, they say New York, and they say also New York's financial dominance and America's financial dominance. So perhaps that will turn out to be a clue as the investigation, which will have to follow this, of course, comes up with something.
We're looking at pictures of the World Trade Center ablaze in New York, the result of two planes which went into the side of the World Trade Centers in the upper stories. It's not clear at the moment whether this was deliberate, though that is the suspicion. Tell us a bit more about the attack on the World Trade Center in 1993 and who was found guilty for that, Jane.
Hello.
I think we've... Ash Rajan, an eyewitness to the attack, joins us now. Ash, what did you see? What can you tell us about what's going on?
Well, I just got off the train right in the belly at the World Trade Center, the train that was getting me in from home this morning. And first, there was just a tremendous smell of gasoline and petroleum. But we just figured that was sort of a train situation. So we were making ourselves up rather calmly on those large escalators. And suddenly there was a sort of a panic run by the rest of the commuters. And then there was a huge explosion. And as we sort of rushed out of the building, we saw what looked like a ticker tape parade. Papers and streamers flowing everywhere. It just looked so surreal. But then the sheer fear and, I guess, the panic of the situation, most of us just ran to side corridors and stuff like that outside on the street. And then moments later, there was another explosion. So all we could see was a tremendous pall of smoke and certainly fire under that smoke in one of the towers of the building. But I got the impression that as I kept running towards my office, more and more people were saying that the second tower had caught on fire as well. I had no idea as to the planes and so on and so forth. I just thought it was some sort of an explosion or a regular fire. But then again, all of downtown looks like a whole mass of people on the street. Trucks, cars, all just strewn around, a pall of black smoke that looks like a tornado climbing over the rest of Wall Street. I could actually now see from my window. I'm now in my office, a little away from the World Trade Center, about a block away. And I could see through my window, and I could see just humanity right downstairs, just strewn with people, cars and trucks and so on and so forth, lots of confusion. And I guess I still don't know what is going on there.
It's a very, very busy time of morning, of course, isn't it, Ash?
Precisely. You couldn't have picked, a busier time this morning. So that is really unfortunate. I just hope and I pray for those people in those 2 or 3 floors or perhaps even more floors that were affected the World Trade Center. This is such a stark coincidence for me because I was there when the explosion went off in the World Trade Center many, many years ago, and I had to walk down 63 floors from the 63rd floor of World Trade Center number 2 with the rest of my colleagues, and that was then. And today, I happen to be in the same building. How could that possibly be? The same building right at the belly of the building getting off the train.
How many floors appear to be affected?
Just from a sort of a quick visual glance at the building, when I was outside the building, it looked more like 6 or 7 with a real heavy fire and a thick black ball of smoke. But apparently now, I've been hearing just from people on the street. I'm not sure how credible those observations are, that it's clearly more floors and certainly another building as well, another tower, the second tower.
Ash Rajan, thank you very much for joining us. And we've got another eyewitness to that accident or explosion at the World Trade Center. Jane Beresford joins us now. Jane, what can you tell us?
I was standing down on the Battery Park ferry terminal, just waiting to catch a ferry actually across to Ellis Island, and just heard a huge explosion. It's about 8:30 behind me. I thought perhaps a building was being demolished, but in fact, you saw there were just towers of smoke coming out within minutes. And again, we still thought it was just a building demolished. There wasn't any great sort of panic at that time. And then you saw flames raging through the building, and then approximately sort of 15, 20 minutes later, a plane flew down right above us, so very, very close to our heads, and smashed right into the other tower. It's a massive explosion, people were screaming, a sort of panic. There wasn't even many fire ambulances and things like that on the street. It all happened so quickly.
And the emergency services response now?
They are on scene now, but people just seemed to be stunned. There seemed to be nothing happened while this sort of first explosion had happened, and there was sort of this sort of silence and nothing going on. And then all of a sudden, all the ambulances and fire engines came down onto the streets, and the most shocking thing was this plane just coming, literally right above our heads and just smashed right into the second building. It was like something out of a film. You just couldn't believe what was happening.
You actually saw the plane going into the side of the building?
Smashed into the side of the building. I mean, you thought it was going to swerve to the left or the right to try and avoid it. It was so low, you knew it was on a collision course with the building, but it just seemed to be heading right for it.
Of course, at the moment, it's too early to tell what was behind it, but so far as you could make out, did it look like an accident?
No, it looked like it was. I mean, you just don't get planes. It's quite a large plane. It didn't look. It was low down in the sky in Manhattan. You're not used to seeing planes that low in the sky in Manhattan, and it just was heading straight for the tower. Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're looking at pictures of the World Trade Center, which is ablaze as a result of two planes which appear to have flown straight into the side of the World Trade Center in New York. It's too early to tell what has caused this, but let me remind you that there was a terrorist bomb explosion in the building in 1993. Eyewitnesses we're also getting reports that two United Airlines planes may have been hijacked. We're hearing that the US President George Bush will speak later on about the World Trade Center crash in Washington. Officials say the FBI is investigating reports of plane hijackings as well as the crashes. Joining us now from Washington is our correspondent, Stephen Sveach. Stephen, what can you tell us about the events in New York this morning?
Well, I think a huge shock here for everybody, not just in New York, not just in Washington, but right across the country. These two towers, the tallest buildings in New York, a symbol of the city's prowess. This is, of course, the world's great financial center and the country's great business center. I think huge shock for everybody. And as seems increasingly likely, this does appear to have been something deliberate. It seems hard to believe that two planes could have crashed into the two towers of the World Trade Center by accident within minutes of each other. If indeed this was a deliberate attack, then I think this is going to cause a huge shock. And I think it will increase the sense, perhaps, for Americans of their vulnerability to these sorts of attacks, which, of course, have been very rare on American soil.
Any word yet of fatalities?
We don't have any word. The attacks came right at the start of the business day. It's possible just after 8:30, it seems, before 9 o'clock anyway. So it's possible that not too many people were in the building. But of course, once again, we're speculating here. But people in New York and in the States do tend to get to work pretty early. So unfortunately, it is possible that there were many people in the building. And we simply don't know what is going on. One can only imagine the devastation in those towers, so high up, so far off the ground. One thing we do seem to know is that there wasn't too much debris on the ground, so it seems that at least people around the World Trade Center haven't been affected too badly. No fatalities on the ground, it seems.
We're looking at pictures of the World Trade Center ablaze in New York as a result of two planes crashing into the World Trade Center. It looks as if it was a deliberate act, but it is too early to tell. Some reports suggest that 6 people were killed in the accident or the explosion and 1,000 people injured. It happened at about 9 o'clock in the morning, New York time. We've also got some pictures of the second plane which crashed into the side of the World Trade Center. There you can see it. It looks as if it was heading straight for one of the towers of the World Trade Center, flying low, and it resulted in an enormous explosion. Some eyewitnesses have told us that the explosion sounded as if the whole building was coming down. 6 or 7 floors seem to have been affected on each of the buildings. Stephen Sveach is with us from Washington. Stephen, we're expecting the president to speak about it soon.
Yes, I think this will be a very important moment, I think, for the President. I think he'll feel that he has to say something about this. The eyes of the whole nation are on what's going on in New York, and then I think the eyes of the whole nation will be on him. And, of course, it'll be interesting to see how he responds. It's possible that the authorities here in Washington know more about this than we do. It's possible they may have had some indication there was going to be some sort of attack. But it's equally possible that they don't. It's equally possible that they don't know any more than we do, and that they too are as it were, groping in the dark to see exactly what led up to this explosion. And therefore, it'll be very interesting to hear what the President has to say.
We're also getting some reports of possible plane hijacking, United Airlines planes. Anything you can tell us about that, Stephen? We've also got reports coming in that at the same time as this attack on the World Trade Center by 2 planes, there may have been a possible hijacking of a United Airlines plane, possibly 2 planes. Stephen Sveach joins us from Washington. Stephen, can you tell us any more about these possible plane hijackings?
Those reports are being investigated by the FBI. Now, if they turn out to be true, then that will once again lend weight. Of course, it will lend absolute weight to the idea that this was an entirely deliberate attack. And it would seem, if it was an attack, very, very well planned and well coordinated by people who were not afraid to lose their lives in the process. So I think, all the evidence pointing towards something very coordinated, very deliberate, and powerfully symbolic in terms of its significance for American interests.
For viewers who've just joined us, you're looking at the New York skyline with the World Trade Center right in the middle, a landmark tower of New York, which has come under attack from 2 planes which crashed apparently deliberately into the side of the World Trade Center. The World Trade Center, as we speak, is ablaze. The explosions appear to be continuing. One eyewitness told us that the explosions were continuing out of control. There are people fleeing from the scene. It's a very busy time of morning at the moment. The explosions took place about half an hour, 45 minutes ago, 9 a.m. New York time. It's not yet clear whether they were indeed deliberate acts or whether it was an accident. One eyewitness told us that she didn't think it was an accident because the plane was flying low and appeared to have gone straight into the side of the building. And this is what Jane Beresford said to us. Let's take another look at the pictures of the second plane, which flew into the side of the building just moments after an earlier plane had flown into the World Trade Center in New York. It was flying low and it appears to have been headed straight for the building. As you can see, several stories of that building are ablaze. Jane Beresford, an eyewitness, told us what she saw.
I was standing down on the Battery Park ferry terminal, just waiting to catch a ferry actually across to Ellis Island, and just heard a huge explosion. It's about 8:30 behind me. I thought perhaps a building was being demolished, but in fact, you saw there were just towers of smoke coming out within minutes. And again, we still thought it was just a building demolished. There wasn't any great sort of panic at that time. And then you saw flames raging through the building, and then approximately sort of 15, 20 minutes later, a plane flew down right above us, so very, very close to our heads, and smashed right into the other tower. It's a massive explosion, people screaming, a sort of panic. There wasn't even many fire ambulances and things like that on the street.
And discuss education. I do want to thank the folks here at Booker Elementary School for their hospitality.
President Bush is due to make a statement on the plane crash.
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
That was the US President George Bush talking about an apparent terrorist attack. His comments on two planes which appear to have deliberately flown into the side of the World Trade Center in New York. Landmark towers in New York. An apparent terrorist attack, he called it. Stephen Sveach is in Washington. Stephen, it does rather look like a suicide attack, doesn't it?
It does indeed. It does seem hard to think that it's anything other than a suicide attack. Indeed, a double suicide attack by two people flying planes. We don't know if anyone else was in them, possibly on their own. And a short but powerful statement there from President Bush, I think quite understandably from his point of view, keeping it very short and succinct, but nonetheless making it very clear he believes this is what he describes as a terrorist attack. He's saying the full resources of the federal government will be brought to bear to hunt down those folks, as he called them, who perpetrated the attack. And he said terrorism in the United States will not stand. So there we are. We have it from the chief executive himself. Not much doubt here from the authorities. This was indeed a deliberate attack.
That this was foul play, in other words.
Absolutely, and I think looking at the evidence, it does seem pretty hard to reach any other conclusion. The idea that you'd have two planes coincidentally flying accidentally into the two tallest buildings on Manhattan Island in the city of New York, it does seem pretty hard to believe. And therefore, I think all the evidence pointing, as President Bush suggested, towards an attack. And now, of course, people will start to wonder who were the attackers, where did they come from? But very, very early to say at this stage.
Just to remind you, if you've just joined us, we're looking at pictures of the World Trade Center ablaze in New York, the result of two planes which flew directly into the Twin Towers, one of the landmarks in New York. It happened at 9 a.m. local time, a very busy time. And this is what one of the eyewitnesses, Jane Beresford, told us.
I was standing down on the Battery Park ferry terminal, just waiting to catch a ferry actually across to Ellis Island, and just heard a huge explosion. It's about 8:30 behind me. I thought perhaps a building was being demolished, but in fact, you saw there were just towers of smoke coming out within minutes. And again, we still thought it was just a building demolished. There wasn't any great sort of panic at that time. And then you saw flames raging through the building, and then approximately sort of 15, 20 minutes later, a plane flew down right above us, so very, very close to our heads, and smashed right into the other tower. It's a massive explosion, people screaming, and sort of panic. There wasn't even many fire ambulances and things like that on the street. It all happened so quickly.
And the emergency services response now?
They are on scene now, but people just seemed to be stunned. There seemed to be nothing happened while this sort of first explosion had happened, and there was sort of this sort of silence and nothing. And then all of a sudden, all the ambulances and fire engines came down onto the streets, and the most shocking thing was this plane just coming, literally right above our heads and just smashed right into the second building. It was like something out of a film. You just couldn't believe what was happening.
You actually saw the plane going into the side of the building?
Smashed into the side of the building. I mean, you thought it was going to swerve to the left or the right to try and avoid it. It was so low, you knew it was on a collision course with the building, but it just seemed to be heading right for it.
Of course, at the moment, it's too early to tell what was behind it, but so far as you could make out, did it look like an accident?
No, it looked like it was. I mean, you just don't get planes. It was quite a large plane. It didn't look. It was low down in the sky in Manhattan. You're not used to seeing planes that low in the sky in Manhattan, and it just was heading straight for the tower.
Jane Beresford, an eyewitness to the attack on the World Trade Center in New York. President Bush said that it was an apparent terrorist attack, and the FBI has called it foul play. Stephen Sveach joins us from Washington. Stephen, what's the latest information you have?
Well, one of the latest information pieces of information that we have is that the FBI are investigating reports that two planes belonging to United Airlines were hijacked before the incident, before the attack, and therefore that will of course be one line of inquiry in this investigation. Where were the planes hijacked? Who were the hijackers? And that may, of course, provide some sort of evidence as to what brought this about. And I think inevitably people are going to start talking about the Middle East, about possible motives for this attack. But very early to say.
There doesn't appear to have been any sort of warning, does there?
No, I mean, I'm sure the authorities here receive warnings about threats to U.S. interests all over the world all the time, in a sense. I mean, we've had attacks on U.S. targets in Yemen. We had those attacks on the embassies in Tanzania and Kenya back in 1998. But incidents of this kind on U.S. soil, extremely rare. And we have to go back to the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, the same building, the 1995 Oklahoma bombing by Timothy McVeigh, and then the attack at the Atlanta Olympics in 1996, although it's still not entirely clear what brought that about. But incidents of this kind, very, very rare indeed here. And therefore, I think that really adds to the sense of shock. And I think just to see the two towers, the tallest buildings in New York, symbols of American power and American capitalism, if you like, to see those two towers on fire, I think that is a pretty chilling sight for people around the country.
Stephen Siege, thank you for that. Those two towers on fire down in New York, the World Trade Center, the result of an apparent terrorist attack. That's what the US president said. Two planes crashed into the Twin Towers as a result of what appears to be a deliberate suicide mission. Joining us now from Washington is Neil Livingston, a terrorism expert. Does this look like an apparent terrorist attack to you?
Well, I think it does. You have to remember that some years ago we had a plane crash at the Empire State Building in the fog, and that was clearly an accident. This is a clear day. The towers are clearly visible. We have two crashes 19 minutes apart, and now we have unconfirmed rumors that unconfirmed reports that one of the planes may have been hijacked. So everything points to a terrorist attack right now.
The reports you're getting are that a plane might have been hijacked and then diverted onto this.
We have unconfirmed reports at this moment.
Why is the World Trade Center being targeted in this way, do you think?
Well, it's a symbol of American strength and the American capitalism. It's just been announced that the stock market has suspended trading. And as a consequence, it's one of those targets that is at the very heart of how our system works. And if you can shut down the stock market in addition to creating a high loss of life, then you can bring extraordinary publicity to whatever your cause is.
The security around the World Trade Center must be very high, I suppose, as a result of the bombing back in 1993.
Well, it's not as high as you might think. I've been there many times, and obviously there are so many thousands of people, some say 70 to 100,000 people a day visit some part of the World Trade Center, work there, and as a consequence, this is one of those places that you have to have free egress and access to the building. So there are trade-offs with security, and certainly the airspace around it. It's very easy to divert out of the flight pattern going into LaGuardia or one of the surrounding airports and veer off and go toward the World Trade Center.
We've got reports coming in on the Reuters news agency that a Palestinian group has claimed responsibility for the New York World Trade Center attacks. Those are unconfirmed, I must stress. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I suspect that we may see this as Islamicist terrorism. And, of course, if that's the case, I think that there's going to be hell to pay in the weeks and months ahead. I don't think that this is the kind of terrorist attack that the United States will take quietly. I think it's basically amounts to a declaration of war, and I think it will be seen that way by the Bush administration.
Well, President Bush, speaking just a short while ago, said that the U.S. would hunt down those who committed the attack on the World Trade Center. But it's not going to be easy.
Well, it won't be easy, but I suspect that we may be able to hunt them down. We've been able to do that in other recent terrorist cases. And if we find the governments have harbored or supported the terrorists in any way, I think those governments become extremely vulnerable at that point.
For viewers who've just joined us, we're going to show you pictures of the second plane as it flew in and appears deliberately to have gone straight into the side of one of the towers. Earlier, another plane had targeted the other tower. You can see an enormous explosion as a direct consequence of that hit. An eyewitness told us it did not look like an accident to her. Still on the line with us is terrorism expert Neil Livingston. The second such attack against the World Trade Center. It must be really quite horrific for the people there at the moment.
Well, we can only imagine what it's like. We have some early reports of absolute pandemonium, absolute chaos, injured people, smoke filling the buildings. Both towers, as you know, are on fire. I think that the loss of life is going to be horrific, and we can only speculate right now on the casualties, and they have our prayers, of course.
Neil Livingston, thank you for joining us. And Ash Raven, who was an eyewitness to the earlier explosion, joined us, and this is what he told us.
Well, I just got off the train right in the belly at the World Trade Center, the train that was getting me in from home this morning. And first, there was just a tremendous smell of gasoline and petroleum. But we just figured that was a sort of a train situation. So we were making ourselves up rather calmly on those large escalators. And suddenly there was a sort of a panic run by the rest of the commuters. And then there was a huge explosion. And as we sort of rushed out of the building, we saw what looked like a ticker tape parade. Papers and streamers flowing everywhere. It just looked so surreal. But then the sheer fear and, I guess, the panic of the situation, most of us just ran to side corridors and stuff like that outside on the street. And then moments later, there was another explosion. So all we could see was a tremendous pall of smoke and certainly fire under that smoke in one of the towers of the building. But I got the impression that as I kept running towards my office, more and more people were saying that the second tower had caught on fire as well. I had no idea as to the planes and so on and so forth. I just thought it was some sort of an explosion or a regular fire. But then again, all of downtown looks like a whole mass of people on the street. Trucks, cars, all just strewn around, a pall of black smoke that looks like a tornado climbing over the rest of Wall Street. I could actually now see it from my window. I'm now in my office, a little away from the World Trade Center, about a block away. And I could see through my window, and I could see just humanity right downstairs, just strewn with people, cars and trucks and so on and so forth, lots of confusion. And I guess I still don't know what is going on there.
It's a very, very busy time of morning, of course, isn't it, Ash?
You couldn't have picked, a busier time this morning. So that is really unfortunate. I just hope and I pray for those people in those 2 or 3 floors, or perhaps even more floors, that were affected the World Trade Center. This is such a stark coincidence for me, because I was there when the explosion went off in the World Trade Center many, many years ago, and I had to walk down 63 floors from the 63rd floor of World Trade Center number 2 with the rest of my colleagues, and that was then. And today, I happen to be in the same building. How could that possibly be? The same building, right at the belly of the building, getting off the train.
How many floors appear to be affected?
Just from a sort of a quick visual glance at the building, when I was outside the building, it looked more like 6 or 7 with a real heavy fire and a thick black ball of smoke. But apparently now, I've been hearing just from people on the street, I'm not sure how credible those observations are, that it's clearly more floors and certainly another building as well, another tower, the second tower.
Eyewitness Ash Raven. Now we're going to cross to Washington. There are pictures there of a hotel behind the Pentagon. There are reports of a terrorist attack on the Pentagon as well. There certainly has been an explosion. You can see thick smoke coming out from behind the Pentagon. It's been evacuated, and there are reports coming through that the White House too has been evacuated. This just a short while after 2 planes attacked the World Trade Center in New York. President Bush said earlier that they were apparent terrorist attacks. It now looks as if the focus of these attacks, if that's what they are, has switched to Washington, to the nerve center of the American government, to the Pentagon, the defense headquarters, and possibly to the White House itself. Joining us now is aviation expert Robert Houston. Robert, what can you tell us about the World Trade Center attacks?
The World Trade Center attack seems to be an astonishingly well-planned, a daring and appalling act. Some of the descriptions that I've heard describe the aircraft involved as small passenger aircraft, but it's far more serious than that. The second aircraft that hit the towers, which there is film of, which some of your viewers may have seen, that is a Boeing 737. It is not a small aircraft. It's a 100-seat airliner, and obviously a very calculated multiple hijacking plan with a suicide attack at the end of it has been put into place by whoever is behind this.
Robert Houston, can you stay with us? We're going to cross to Washington now, where we're getting reports of attacks, possible attacks on the Pentagon. We're joined now by the BBC's John Lyne. John, what can you tell us?
Okay, I'm at Washington National Airport, which is less than a mile from the Pentagon building, which is the headquarters, of course, of the U.S. Defense Department. There's a huge pall of smoke coming from that direction, and people at this airport are saying that a Boeing 757 jetliner has crashed into the Pentagon. Now, I cannot confirm that. Certainly something very bad has happened there. There's a horrible smell here. There's a huge pall of smoke, and there's obviously been some awful thing happened there, but I can't precisely confirm because I cannot see the Pentagon building directly in my line of sight. But certainly from that area, there is a massive pile of smoke. They've shut down this airport. I was just trying to get a plane to New York. They've shut down this airport immediately. There are no plane movements, and they're evacuating the area. It looks as if something very nasty has happened here today indeed.
John, thank you for that. We're looking at pictures from Washington, from just behind the Pentagon, the defense headquarters in the United States. John Lyne is at Washington Airport. John, the defense headquarters would be an extraordinary target. We've lost John Lyne. With me in the studio, though, is the BBC's Jim Fish. Jim, a series of coordinated attacks.
It looks very much like it, yes. An extraordinary amount of, as the defense expert was saying, the aviation expert just then, an extraordinary amount of coordination required to hijack, if that's the case, not one but three aircraft and crash them into such high-profile targets within minutes or within the space of an hour of each other. One thing, of course, people will now be looking at the perpetrators, the possible perpetrators of these attacks, and they do bear the same hallmark of the twin attacks, if you recall, back in 1998 on the two US embassies in East Africa, in Nairobi, Kenya, and in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, which took place within minutes of each other, but several hundred miles apart. They also caused large numbers of casualties. They were blamed by the American authorities on Middle East terrorists, possibly on Osama bin Laden, the Saudi dissident now thought to be in Afghanistan. If these attacks are also to be put down to the same organization, I'm sure that American officials will be looking very carefully at that possibility, the possibility that Osama bin Laden may have been involved in this. But of course, at the moment, it's far too early to tell.
At the moment, we're looking at pictures of the World Trade Center in New York, which is ablaze as a result of being attacked by two planes, one a 737, which may have been hijacked before it was flown straight into the World Trade Center, but also in Washington, at the heart of US government. There are reports that another plane, a 757, may have flown directly into the heart of the US defense establishment, into the Pentagon. Those are unconfirmed reports, though we have seen pictures of smoke billowing out from the Pentagon. We've got reports that Washington is being evacuated, the very heart of Washington, the US Capitol, including the White House. Earlier, the US President George Bush said he thought they were apparent terrorist attacks and that whoever was responsible would be hunted down. The BBC's Orla Guerin joins us. Orla, what can you tell us?
Well, what we've had here locally is a claim of responsibility. The initial report came from the Reuters news agency. It was quoting Abu Dhabi television and saying that they had received a call from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, claiming that it was responsible for the plane crashes into both of the trade towers. Now, since then, we've managed to check with local spokesmen for that organisation, for the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and 2 local spokesmen here in the West Bank and Ramallah have denied that. So already there is doubt being cast on this claim, but I think it has to be treated with a great deal of caution at this stage.
We're looking at pictures at the moment. 2 enormous fires. The one on the left is in New York, the World Trade Center, which was attacked by 2 planes around about 9 o'clock this morning. The one on the right, the Pentagon, the US Defense Headquarters. Some reports say that a plane was flown straight into the Pentagon. That is as yet unconfirmed. Palestinian organization, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, has apparently claimed responsibility. Orla Guerin joins us now. Orla, what can you tell us about the DFLP?
Well, I think first of all we should say that that claim does have to be treated with caution because local spokesmen for that organisation here in the West Bank in Ramallah are denying that they had any involvement. It would be unusual if this organisation was involved. It's quite a small splinter faction of the Palestinian Liberation Organisation. It's believed to be now about the 3rd largest group. It hasn't been involved in airline hijackings in the past, even back in the 1970s when Palestinian terror groups were carrying out attacks of that kind and were involved in hijackings. It wasn't this faction, it was another one. So I do think we have to be cautious, but the initial claim was reported by the Reuters news agency. They were quoting Abu Dhabi television and saying that they had received a call from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and in that call they apparently did claim responsibility for both of those aircrafts crashing into the World Trade Towers.
Okay, Orla, thank you for that. We're looking at pictures of 2 enormous fires, one in New York at the World Trade Center, the other at the Pentagon. They both appear to be the result of deliberate plane crashes, suicide missions. Joining us from Washington is the BBC's Stephen Speech. Stephen, what can you tell us about this situation at the Pentagon?
Well, it seems that a 3rd aircraft is involved. These are the reports we're getting, that a 3rd aircraft has crashed, and it's possible that it actually did crash into the Pentagon or somewhere near the Pentagon. So really quite extraordinary. Not only has this attack, as I think we can call it, been carried out in New York, the World Trade Center, the symbol of American financial, economic power, but also at the Pentagon, the heart of the US military complex. Quite extraordinary, and I think pretty shocking for most people here.
And what time does this attack at the Pentagon appear to have taken place at, Stephen?
Well, it seems to have been shortly after the attacks on the World Trade Center. Now, it's possible that it didn't happen that long afterwards, that we've only just found out about it. But I think, yes, I mean, you know, we're talking about within an hour of the attack on the World Trade Center. So clearly highly coordinated, very well planned by some very, very determined people.
The word we get is that the Washington capital is being evacuated.
Well, certainly I think government buildings will be evacuated. I think if I was sitting in a US government building here just down the road at the State Department or the Treasury, I think I'd be pretty nervous just seeing all these places, as it were, going up in smoke one after the other. I think you've got to think, well, what's coming next? And I think clearly a sensible move, an inevitable move to evacuate these buildings, and just increases the sense of vulnerability that people working for the US government have, and also the sense that there are people out there who just, you know, don't like what they're doing for whatever reason and are going to try and hit them.
Was there any sense of preparedness in Washington for anything like this in the last few days?
No, I don't think so. I mean, yeah, it's possible that the authorities here knew something was coming. But one thinks if they had any idea that anything on this scale was going to happen, they might have actually asked people not to turn up for work, or have taken the precaution of evacuating these buildings earlier on. So I don't think among people here there was any sense of that. I mean, it was curious. Just the other day, I was walking through Washington, and it did strike me that there are so many prominent people, prominent buildings here. In a sense, this is the heart of power, the heart of the world's only superpower, and a very, very tempting target for people who want to get at the United States. And it does call into question, is it possible to provide absolute security? President Bush wants to provide a missile defense shield for the United States to protect against intercontinental ballistic missiles. Some people think that's possible, others think it isn't. And yet we have here a few planes hijacked in the United States and flying low, avoiding detection by radar, and carrying out these attacks. So it's a pretty sobering day for Americans.
What's the latest information we have, Stephen, on those planes? You said that they'd been hijacked. Do we know that for certain?
This information is still coming in. I mean, we've had some pretty credible reports, and it's certainly being investigated by the FBI, that the planes were hijacked. I think a couple of them from United Airlines. But we still need to get absolute confirmation of that. And now, of course, we know that all the planes, it seems, planes right around the States are being grounded. So the authorities clearly taking this very seriously, as you would expect them to.
Stephen Swede, thank you for that. We're just going to take another look at the pictures of the second plane as it flew into the side of the World Trade Center in New York, shortly after an earlier plane had attacked the other Trade Center building. Right down in downtown Manhattan, you can see an enormous explosion there. It appears to have been a coordinated attack, because in Washington, the Pentagon has also suffered an attack, or buildings close to the Pentagon appear to have been attacked, also by planes, large planes, possibly as large as a 757. This appears to be a terrorist attack. A Palestinian organization, the DFLP, was said to have been responsible, but a senior official for that organization has denied responsibility. So at the present, we do not know who was responsible for these attacks in the United States, at the World Trade Center in New York and at the Pentagon in Washington. Washington has been evacuated. The heart of Washington, government offices are being evacuated. You can see at the moment pictures from around the Pentagon, rescue workers trying to put out the blaze. We saw an ambulance go by a few minutes ago. Stephen Speech is in Washington. Stephen, what's the latest information we have?
Well, the latest information is that government buildings around the city, around Washington, D.C., have been evacuated. There is a fire going on at or around the Pentagon. It appears that a third plane crashed into or very nearby the Pentagon, in addition to the two planes that crashed into the World Trade Center. No reports of casualties here in Washington, but I think many casualties, certainly perhaps 5 more dead in the World Trade Center and many, many injured.
Joining us now is Greg Barrow in New York. Greg, what's the latest information from the World Trade Center?
Well, the latest we have is that the whole area has been sealed off. The police and security personnel are down there trying to clear members of the public away. This was a very, very busy time of the morning in New York, just as everybody was going into their offices, so it couldn't really have come at a worse time. And I think that the search is already beginning for those who may be to blame for this incident that has really, truly shocked people, not just here in New York, but also around the country.
Any word on fatalities? It was a very, very busy time.
Well, it was a busy time. We won't know for some time yet just how many people were killed or injured. Now, if there were large numbers of people on the planes that crashed into the building, then clearly that is going to lead to a very, very high death toll. The offices, it was at a time when people would have just been going into work. It's unclear how full those offices would have been, but they could have been hundreds, maybe thousands of people in those offices at the time that the planes impacted into the building. So potentially there are huge numbers of casualties, but really too early to say precisely what's happening at this stage.
When we were talking to eyewitnesses earlier, they said that the situation seemed to be out of control, that the explosions were just running, and it looks as if the tower, one of the towers, has fallen down. Is that your understanding?
Well, this is just such an unexpected event. It's something that nobody could plan for. Obviously, in 1993, there was an explosion at the World Trade Center. A bomb was set off. But I think even in people's wildest imaginations, nobody could have foreseen two planes crashing into each tower of the Twin Trade Center. And the fact that this has happened, and such an unusual event, such a shocking event, perhaps has stunned not just the emergency services, but everyone around.
We're looking at the very disturbing pictures from New York of the World Trade Center. Only one tower is standing. The other has collapsed. You can see an extraordinary amount of smoke billowing out. It's the result of an attack by two planes which flew into each of the towers at around 9 o'clock this morning. It appears to have been a deliberate terrorist attack, a suicide mission. Only one of the World Trade Center towers is standing. In Washington, we've also seen an attack on the Pentagon, or close to the Pentagon, the U.S. Defense headquarters. The White House and the Capitol have been evacuated. These are apparent terrorist attacks. That's what the U.S. President George Bush said. And a U.S. official, citing a transmission from the plane, says one of the two planes that crashed into the World Trade Center was hijacked after takeoff from Boston. The Federal Aviation Authority has grounded all planes for the moment and closed all airports. All of the major road links into New York have also been closed, but we don't yet have any word on the extent of injuries or possible fatalities from the attacks. Stephen Speech is in Washington, and joins us now. Stephen, what news have you got?
Well, the latest I have for you is the Associated Press news agency is saying that the plane that crashed here in Washington crashed into a helicopter launch pad near the Pentagon. So it seems, if that report is correct, that the Pentagon itself has not been hit, but there is a fire in the vicinity. The White House and other government buildings and, of course, the Pentagon have been evacuated, but certainly no reports of casualties here in Washington.
We're looking at smoke billowing out of the World Trade Center. An hour ago, it was attacked by a plane, and then a second plane went into the other World Trade Center tower in New York. A short while ago, that tower collapsed onto the ground in huge puffs of smoke. There's been panic around the World Trade Center. It was at a very busy time of day. These appear to have been terrorist attacks. A Palestinian organization, the DFLP, appeared to have said that it was responsible. That has now been denied. It's not known who is responsible for these attacks at the landmark World Trade Center in New York and against the U.S. Defense headquarters in the Pentagon. Another plane appears to have flown into that. At least one of the planes that attacked the World Trade Center, it's believed, was hijacked and had originally flown from Boston. The U.S. President George Bush said he will hunt down those who are responsible for attacking the United States in this way. With us here in the studio is Jim Fish. Jim, what's the latest information we have?
Well, it's a scene of absolute and utter chaos and devastation that we're looking at. It has appeared in the last few minutes that the south tower of the World Trade Center collapsed after it was struck about an hour ago by that second aircraft. We can't, because of the extent of that devastation, the thick cloud of smoke that's now covering most of Manhattan, it's impossible to tell to what extent, what the extent of the damage is. And I think for that reason, it'll take some time to find out how great the casualty toll is. But we can only speculate that if that second tower has collapsed or partially collapsed, then there will be sheer destruction and devastation on the ground, and because it was such a busy time of the day, early morning in Manhattan, we do know that the security services had sealed off the area around the trade towers. But I'm afraid to say that it does seem that the casualty toll will have climbed disastrously if the second tower has collapsed, because there will have been hundreds, possibly thousands of people within the vicinity of that tower.
And we're seeing layer upon layer of tragedy here. The original planes that went into the World Trade Centers were apparently themselves hijacked. At least one of them was. The latest news we've got is that it was an American Airlines plane, possibly with a number of passengers on it, which went straight into the top of the World Trade Center. Then we're seeing the World Trade Center on fire at a very busy time of the morning, full of office workers. One of the blocks collapsed. We don't know to what extent it was successfully evacuated before it happened. So scenes of extraordinary carnage and scenes of extraordinary destruction in New York at the World Trade Center, one of the landmarks of the Manhattan skyline. Over in Washington, another attack, this time against the US government itself. We've got pictures from the Pentagon. Close by to the Pentagon, another plane, possibly also hijacked, went into or near the Pentagon. Smoke billowing from there. The fires appear to be out of control. We don't yet know whether there have been any casualties. One can only imagine. The word from Washington is that the White House, the Pentagon, and all government offices have been evacuated. All planes in the United States have been grounded and airports have been shut down. The United States has really gone into emergency mode now, hasn't it, Jim?
Yes, and the extraordinary thing is that because of the extent of these attacks, these disasters, I think there's an overload of the emergency services, and of course the news, the information that is emerging from both New York and Washington has been restricted as a result. I think they are working flat out just to try and get to grips with the scale of these disasters. So we're unable to know, we can't tell you yet what the extent of the casualties is. This is the very first few minutes, the first hour of these events taking place. But it's impossible to say at the moment how the emergency services are dealing with these twin strikes. It seems that the New York World Trade Center attack has now been complicated by the collapse or partial collapse of one of those towers. You can see by the extent of the thick cloud of smoke that's enveloping the entire area that emergency work by the fire services, by the rescue services, must be difficult, if not impossible. Reaching up to the very top of those towers, it's difficult to say. There have been helicopters on the scene, but of course now their job has been further complicated by that the sheer thick weight of that smoke enveloping the two towers, or what's left of them.
This is the second major attack against the World Trade Center. The first was in 1993, a bomb attack by Islamic militants. What we haven't ever seen before, though, is a major attack against the Pentagon in Washington, the heart of the US government. It will shake up Washington considerably, won't it, Jim?
You can't think of a more direct hit into striking at the very heart of US government, apart from, of course, the White House itself. And it's for that reason, I'm sure, that although President Bush is not in the White House, he's been in Florida this morning. That's for that very reason that the White House and all other government buildings in Washington have been evacuated. I think the U.S. administration must now be thinking what other possible targets must be looming up if the heart of its defense establishment has now been hit, plus the two twin towers, the symbol of U.S. financial business in the United States and around the world. I think they will be thinking now whether or not there are other targets that have been selected.
And there are concerns about the United Nations headquarters in New York as well. Joining us from New York is the BBC's Greg Barrow. Greg, what's the latest information you have?
Well, not much to add, only that we're witnessing the collapse of those two World Trade Center towers that were hit this morning. And huge amounts of smoke and debris billowing out from the bottom of those buildings, spreading down the streets 2 or 3 blocks around that area. So a whole area, several hundred meters in circumference, has now been affected by this explosion. And one can only imagine the scenes at the bottom there when this happened, as the emergency services were trying to evacuate those buildings.
A job made extremely difficult by the sheer amount of smoke.
Yes, and we should also mention the time that this attack took place. This was one of the busiest times of the morning, rush hour, as people were going to work in one of the most heavily populated areas, cities in America. So the problems that those emergency services are facing are just huge.
We're just looking at a lone helicopter battling against the clouds above the World Trade Center. The emergency services must be extremely stretched.
Yes, I think visibility down there is just one of the many problems. Also the concern that maybe the second tower could go tumbling down. These two of the tallest buildings in the world, when they fall, the amount of bricks and mortar and glass and debris cascading down in a very, very densely populated area is bound to cause yet more casualties. So I think the main aim of the emergency services at the moment is to get as many people as possible away from those buildings.
Any word from the local hospitals, Greg?
Not yet. I think that they will just be sort of completely overburdened with the immediate injuries. I think one of the greatest difficulties is getting people through the traffic and through the streets and to those emergency services as quickly as possible. I think you can probably see the huge crowds of people in that area, which will only impede efforts to get the injured to hospital.
The picture in New York there. There's also been an attack in Washington. We've got reports that there's been a second attack at the Pentagon earlier. These pictures are from New York, I believe. We saw earlier that one of the towers of the World Trade Center had collapsed. There are considerable fears about whether the second tower will be able to stand up for much longer, and that is, of course, hampering the efforts of the rescue services. About 9 o'clock this morning, we saw 2 planes going straight into the World Trade Center, and you can see the picture there, smoke still billowing, the fire's completely out of control. It's making the job of the rescue services extremely difficult. We've seen a few helicopters trying to get to the scene, but visibility must be extremely difficult for them. Jim Fish is with me here. Jim, we're not getting very much information at the moment as to injuries, as to the number of people that may have been caught up in this terrible, terrible accident, this terrible incident.
It's difficult enough for the emergency services to actually gain access to the sites of these terrible events. Particularly in New York, the pictures we're looking at, you can see now the thick pall of smoke that's enveloping the scene. One of the other problems there, of course, is that these fumes will be extremely toxic. That'll mean that only people with proper breathing apparatus will be able to get anywhere near the rescue work. I think that's probably going to be restricting work as well.
We've got an eyewitness here telling us about the scene there at the World Trade Center in New York.
Complete mayhem, but everybody, few people took charge and they kept calm and kept moving people down. So thank God. Helwani, Tarek.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck.
A warning to the US, that eyewitness said. You can see people looking up to the skies in disbelief in the United States, in New York. The World Trade Center there almost entirely obliterated by smoke. Only one tower is still standing. The other has been brought down by an astonishing suicide bomb attack, twin suicide missions by 2 planes, one of which at least appears to have been a hijacked United Airways 737. You can see the skyline over New York is just a mass of cloud, a lone helicopter trying to find its way in. It happened at one of the busiest times, the 9 o'clock morning rush hour, And it's still not apparent who attacked, who is responsible for this scene of carnage. Over in Washington, there were scenes at the Pentagon, similar scenes, smoke billowing out because the Pentagon, the US Defense Headquarters, was also under attack. One, possibly two plane attacks. The BBC's Stephen Sveach is there. Does it look as if there have been two attacks on the Pentagon, Stephen?
So far, I think we're talking about one. Now, that may change, but at the moment, it seems to have been just the one aircraft. I mean, I'm saying just one aircraft. I mean, it is an extraordinary event for an aircraft to crash, it seems, next to the Pentagon. It appears the building itself was not hit. The reports we're getting is that there was a huge explosion which threw people off their feet inside the Pentagon. That's according to US officials and eyewitnesses. And they're talking about an airliner, so we're talking about a large vehicle, a large plane crashing near the Pentagon, it seems just by a helicopter launch pad. And the one reporter who happened to be inside the building at the time, she's been quoted as saying that she was thrown to the ground by the force of the blast.
Just coming up now.
There are the press agents and everybody else that went the other way as everybody else went this way.
When you saw this collapse taking place, could you see if there were a lot of people on the ground near the building as it was happening?
No, I was further north than you were, but I was dead looking at 6th Avenue, the view you see of both towers as you come down 6th Avenue.
Right.
So, and most of this fallout stops about there.
An eyewitness to the World Trade Center attack, an extremely audacious terrorist attack against the World Trade Centers in New York. Jim Fish, the BBC's Jim Fish, has the latest information.
We are now getting more information about what may have happened, may have led up to these incidents, these attacks. General Richard Myers, who's the Vice Chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, has been reported by one of the news agencies, Associated Press, as saying that one hijacked plane was known about by officials heading from the New York area to Washington. Of course, they wouldn't have had time if that was the aircraft that hit close to the Pentagon. They obviously didn't have time to give out an alert. The other two aircraft, it's possible we have one unnamed US official saying that one was hijacked after takeoff from Boston, and a third was hijacked from Newark, New Jersey.
Let's just listen to what this eyewitness in New York is saying.
And we looked out at it, all of a sudden, boom, it seemed like it wasn't even real. And we came running over here closer to the place, and all of a sudden we saw the other explosion. I don't know. You know, that's all I saw. I saw a couple of people jumping out of the other building. I've seen 2 or 3 people jump out of the building. The first one, I don't know if that's number 1 tower, number 2 tower. It's unreal.
Gotta move back. Panic on the streets of New York. There are people running away from the vicinity of the World Trade Center, where earlier 2 planes slammed into the sides of the twin towers of the World Trade Center. They're clearly being sent as far away as possible. Scenes of fear and pandemonium in New York. As you can see, the twin towers, one is already down, the other is billowing with smoke, the fire still out of control. That people should be as close as this is perhaps rather worrying. It happened in the middle of the 9 o'clock rush hour, and you can see that the police are trying to clear the streets and get people as far away from the building as possible. Perhaps they're worried that the second twin tower might collapse. We saw the first come down with a terrible bang. You can see the fire still raging. Let's just hear what this man has to say.
I was in B tower. A tower.
What floor were you on?
B1.
What floor?
The first one.
What happened? Tell me.
When a big explosion happened, some guy came out, his skin was all off. I helped him out. This is him all over. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
Anything else that you saw? Were you there for the second hit by the plane?
About 10 minutes later, the second building went off.
Did you see it?
Yes, I saw it. It just blew up. A big explosion. People started running. It was just chaos everywhere. People jumping out. People just kept jumping and jumping and jumping. And you could still see they were alive because they were flailing around.
The FBI has already stepped in to investigate. It could be possibly a terrorist strike.
It could be. It could be because the first one went off and then 10 minutes later this just blew up out of nowhere.
Hard to think that that would just be accidental.
No, I don't think it would be accidental.
Back it up, folks. Back it up. Kenny?
Johanneman.
Spell your name.
JohannenEmann.
And you were working there?
Yes, I was right there.
Eyewitness telling what he saw, a huge fireball at the World Trade Center as two planes slammed into the side of these twin towers in the bottom of Manhattan. The security personnel were trying to move them along. The streets of New York are being cleared, possibly for fear that the second twin tower will come down. Earlier we saw one of the towers collapse in an enormous thud of debris and smoke. It's an extremely dangerous situation still in the scenes in the streets of New York. In Washington, meanwhile, there's been an attack just near the Pentagon. These are pictures of New York. You can see FBI personnel trying to clear the streets. The FBI are investigating these attacks. The US president has said that those responsible will be hunted down and brought to justice. But that's a long way off yet. At the moment, the most important thing is simply trying to stabilize the situation, putting out the fires, and helping the many hundreds of people who have been caught up in one of the most audacious attacks in the United States. You can see just how upset and shocked people are. It happened at one of the busiest times.
Bang! And then we saw smoke coming out, and everybody started running out, and we saw the plane on the other side of the building, and there was smoke everywhere, and people are jumping out the windows. Over there, they're jumping out the windows, I guess because they're trying to save themselves. I don't know. And I don't know, everybody just doesn't know where to go. They won't everything is blocked off. You can't even, they're telling us to get out, but there's nowhere to go. And then I heard that another plane hit, and if you go over by there, you can see the people jumping out the window. They're jumping out the window right now. Oh my God.
All right, ma'am, thank you.
The panic of an eyewitness at the World Trade Center, talking about people jumping out of the windows of the World Trade Center to try and escape the collapsing World Trade Center as a result of two suicide plane attacks. Joining us from Washington is Stephen Sveach. There's also been an attack near to the Pentagon, the US Defense Headquarters. Stephen, what can you tell us?
It seems that a large aircraft, it's being described as an airliner, crashed into just near the Pentagon, near the west side of the Pentagon, near a helicopter launch pad, or on a helicopter launch pad. There was a big explosion. Eyewitnesses and officials say they were thrown to the ground by the force of the blast. It appears there have been some injuries. One news agency, AFP, is talking about 7 injuries. No reports of any fatalities from that incident here in Washington. But the Pentagon's been evacuated, the White House evacuated, and various other government buildings. So a sense of a great shock and great alertness here in Washington.
And presumably all the airports in the United States have been grounded as a result of this. 3 planes apparently hijacked.
Well, certainly, yes, at least one of them hijacked, we think. And yes, commercial flights have been completely suspended throughout the country. We're also getting reports that Virgin Atlantic have cancelled their flights actually into the country. So it seems that international flights may also be affected. I mean, it's hard to overstate the magnitude of this, both in terms of the terrible tragedy in New York, and also just in terms of the symbolic power of these attacks on such prominent targets by some very, very determined people.
Stephen Sveach in Washington. So at least one of the planes that went into the World Trade Center appears to have been hijacked. We don't really know much about the other 2. There's been an attack on the other World Trade Center and also the Pentagon, near to the Pentagon in Washington, the defense headquarters. Who is responsible? That is still unclear. The Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine have denied being behind the attack.
The DFLP has no relation to this accident or this incident. We have always been against terroristic actions, against civilian targets, and especially outside the occupied territories. But in spite of that, we deny our responsibility, but we call upon the American administration to review their attitude and their policy towards the Palestinian question, because this policy arouses the anger and the hatred of our people and of all Arab and Islamic peoples, and it's liable actually to harm the interests of the United States in our region, and therefore it has to be reviewed.
Denial from the Palestinian group, the DFLP, that it was responsible for attacking the World Trade Center. We've also got reports coming through that a car bomb has exploded outside the State Department in Washington. That's according to senior law enforcement officials. Let me just remind you, there have been several attacks on the nerve centers of the US administration. We're looking at pictures from New York of the World Trade Center, which at 9 a.m. this morning came under attack by 2 planes. You can see the fire engines there trying to put out the fire. It's been raging for over an hour at the moment, and still no sign of it coming under control. The first plane went in at about 9 o'clock. A short while later, another aircraft appears to have crashed near the Pentagon in Washington. The White House and Capitol in Washington have been evacuated. These are apparently terrorist attacks. That's what the US President George Bush called them. A US official, citing a transmission from one of the planes, said that the first plane that crashed into the World Trade Center was hijacked after takeoff from Boston. The Federal Aviation Authority has grounded all planes for the moment and closed all airports. All the major road links into New York have also been closed. We have no word yet at the moment on the extent of injuries from the attacks. This report from Mike Wooldridge.
This was the second of the 2 explosions. A plane comes in from the right of the picture and appears to be about to pass behind the South Tower. Next comes a huge explosion with debris showering out from the tower and down towards the streets below. The upper floors of this tower then become immediately obscured by the billowing smoke. This was just a few minutes after there'd been another explosion near the top of the North Tower. Eyewitnesses said this tower appeared to be struck by a plane that came in low and then hit the building at a slight angle. Again, within seconds, the upper floors were consumed by flames and smoke. As panic erupted at ground level in New York's financial center at the start of the business day, the city and the country tried to make sense of it. Many of those who'd seen it happen said they were assuming these were planes that had flown deliberately into the 2 landmark buildings. It was simply hard to believe otherwise. The aircraft seemed to make no attempt to swerve away from the towers. As news of the casualties began to come in, the administration firmed up this growing belief that it seemed to be a terrorist attack. The FBI said it was investigating reports that 2 planes had been hijacked before the attack. And then, as New Yorkers were watching it all happen again, the towers were struck by bombers in 1993. Less than an hour later came unconfirmed reports that something similar may have happened at the Pentagon in Washington. There were reports of an explosion at the heart of the US defense establishment, and this was the scene afterwards. The White House was evacuated too. Mike Wooldridge, BBC News.
So these are the pictures now. It's Nick Gowing replacing Nisha Pillay, and you can see still the plumes of smoke. We do have news that a car bomb has exploded outside the State Department. Most offices of state in Washington have now been evacuated. The Pentagon is now very much subject to a major fire and emergency alert. There you have pictures in downtown New York. In the area, I think, from what I can see, near the World Trade Center, one of the towers has collapsed. Both towers have now collapsed. We gather this is within about an hour and a half of the towers being hit by a hijacked plane, which has been confirmed as an American Airlines plane, which had set off from Boston bound for Los Angeles. American Airlines 11, according to authorities in Boston. The Federal Aviation Administration has now grounded all planes right across the United States, fearful of what might happen next and what other intentions those who've coordinated this attack might have. President Bush, who was speaking down in Sarasota in Florida, called this an apparent terrorist attack. That's literally as the news was coming through. This is the scene now from downtown New York. One can imagine the chaos there, but also this is going to have a massive effect on the infrastructure of the United States on the eastern seaboard. There, the Pentagon, you can still see the smoke rising from one part. Apparently the airliner hit the helicopter pad, which is just across the main freeway from the Potomac River. That's eyewitnesses saw the tail of the plane go into that helicopter pad, which is just outside one of many doors in the Pentagon, which of course is the Defense Department. That is only one small part of the Pentagon, because below ground, if my memory serves me correct, there are at least 7 floors. This was built expecting some kind of nuclear attack one day, and that's where the most heavily defended and protected parts of the Pentagon are, well down deep into the bowels of Virginia there, across the river. Here we have the center of New York. Not only the World Trade Center, but reports saying the UN headquarters has been evacuated, with people being ushered down into the basement of the UN headquarters, which is a little bit uptown from the World Trade Center, which is right down on the southern tip of Manhattan. Well, let's go to another witness of the World Trade Center attack, and he said he saw people jumping from the building.
And we looked out at it, and all of a sudden, boom, it seemed like it wasn't even real. And we came running over here closer to the place, and all of a sudden we saw the other explosion. I don't know. You know, that's all I saw. I saw a couple of people jumping out of the other building. I've seen 2 or 3 people jump out of the building. The first one, I don't know if that's number 1 tower, number 2 tower. It's unreal.
Downtown New York there, and there the scene across Manhattan. A scene where, in normal times, you'd expect to see at least 2 towers of the World Trade Center. They have now both collapsed following the hijack of at least 1 aircraft, which was flown directly into one of the towers. That collapsed about 40 minutes ago. The second one collapsed a few minutes ago. There's the shot of the southern tip of Manhattan. Over to Washington to Stephen Sveach. Stephen, what do you have?
Well, the latest is that in addition to the attack on the Pentagon, the fire there, the airliner crashing into the helicopter launch pad, there has been a car bomb outside the State Department, the headquarters of US foreign policy. The building's been evacuated. We don't have reports of any casualties. President Bush, who has been in Florida this week, is heading back to Washington. And we also have, this is quoting the CBS television network, this is to give some idea of potentially the scale of the tragedy in New York. CBS are saying that of the 2 planes that crashed into the World Trade Center, one was from Boston, the other was from Dallas, and it's possible that on board there may have been 150 people.
Now, what is the scene in Washington at the moment? Can you see out across to the smoke across the Potomac and the level of smoke which is coming from there?
It's difficult for me here in the studio to see that, but I think a sense of great shock here in Washington. So far it seems that in terms of casualties, we don't have anything like the sort of tragedy that's unfolding in New York. But in terms of the explosion that went off at the Pentagon, knocked people to the ground, car bomb at the State Department, I think a lot of government buildings, if not all of them, have been evacuated. Certainly the Capitol, the Congress building up on the Hill, the State Department, the White House, the Pentagon, the Treasury, all those seem to have been evacuated. And I wouldn't be surprised if all the other government buildings have been evacuated too.
Now, Stephen, in recent years, certainly the Secret Service, the FBI, and all the intelligence agencies have insisted that there be much better protection from ground attacks, certainly, against those who might wish to drive or try to drive up to the White House, Congress, or whatever. But clearly this is not enough in this kind of situation.
Well, we know that the United States, some people would say that they're obsessed with security here, But clearly, however far you take security precautions, one has to ask the question, is it ever going to be enough? We know that President Bush wants to defend the United States from attack by missiles with his missile defense program. Some people think that's possible, others think it isn't. But when you have people who are absolutely determined to carry out these attacks, determined, it seems, to lose their own lives in the process, it really does make us ask the question, how far is it possible to avoid incidents like this? Planes can fly at low altitudes. They can avoid detection by radar. We had the incident 20 years ago, this is going back some way in time, where a young German pilot flew into Moscow, into Red Square, after flying right through Soviet air defenses. And it seems that even today it's still quite possible for that sort of thing to happen. So of course we're going to have people raising the issue of greater security here. But as I say, we have to ask the question, is that possible to really totally protect these buildings?
Now, for those of you who are just joining BBC World at this point and wondering if you're watching an unreal scene, this is real scene from downtown New York, shortly after this plane crashed into the World Trade Center. It had been hijacked a short time earlier on a trip, we believe, from Boston. We understand it was an American Airlines plane en route from Boston to Los Angeles, flight American Airlines 11. And that was what began what has been a cataclysmic 2 hours in the United States, because a second plane was hijacked, a third plane was hijacked close to Washington and has been flown into an area which is just to the side of the Pentagon, across the river from the White House, Congress, the executive buildings, the Treasury buildings, the World Bank, and all the main offices of state. That a reminder of the terrible incident which began this trigger, this timetable of dreadful events across the east coast of America. There is the Pentagon, the southern part of the defense headquarters, the brain of the American political, at least, defense system. Of course, they have a large number of bunkers and other secure areas scattered right across the United States, down in Florida, Cheyenne Mountain, across in Colorado, many other secure areas, and indeed there are provisions within the American procedures for the President, Secretary of State, and others to take shelter along with those who have to make the critical decisions. Here the scene on the ground in New York, and not that I'm there, but it does look as if you can see, you can get a sense of the enormous amounts of dust and debris and everything else which have been blown and literally across in a typhoon from the bottom of the World Trade Center after first the first tower, then the second tower collapsed at the bottom of Manhattan. That distinct landmark at the bottom of Manhattan. And that's the scene in what is left in that area alongside the World Trade Center. Ola Guerin, our correspondent, is joining me from Jerusalem. Ola, how is this being viewed from the Middle East?
Well, there's an enormous sense of shock here. People have been glued to their television screens with mounting horror, watching the events unfold. I should say that it's still in no way clear that the events taking place in the United States are at all connected to this region, although obviously that must be the fear, and there's a great deal of speculation of that kind. We did earlier on have one anonymous claim of responsibility that was made to a television station in Abu Dhabi, and a caller claiming to represent a radical Palestinian faction, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, claimed that they had carried out the hijackings and they had attacked the World Trade Center. Now, I should stress that since then, official spokesmen for that organization have been at pains to say that they were not involved. Statements saying that they were against hijacking planes and against endangering the lives of civilians who were not connected to the struggle here in this region. We have been receiving reports in the last 10 minutes or so of celebrations taking place in Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. and also of impromptu celebrations taking place on the West Bank. And I think that's something that isn't a great surprise. Many Palestinians here do regard America as being pro-Israeli and will often express anti-American sentiments, but I don't think we can extrapolate too much from that at this stage.
Now, all a standby, because I've got more disturbing news that, according to reports reaching us from Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, another large plane has crashed in western Pennsylvania. That is according to news agency reports quoting officials from Somerset County Airport. I can't tell you precisely where Somerset County is, but just to say, these are unconfirmed reports from western Pennsylvania, from Somerset County, that another large plane, and that means, from what we know at the moment, that means there have been 4 aircraft hijackings, apparently synchronized, attacking, so far as we can see there, the enduring symbols of American power, many of which have now been evacuated. The president has been down in Florida. Now, the first event was just before 9 o'clock on the World Trade Center. There you can see the images from a helicopter of the smoke billowing across the lower Hudson River, across towards the Statue of Liberty. And we've got the eyewitness view of a man who was in B Tower of what was then the World Trade Center.
I was in B Tower.
B Tower?
A Tower.
What floor were you on?
B1.
What floor?
The first one.
What happened? Tell me.
When a big explosion happened, some guy came out, his skin was all off. I helped him out. This is him all over. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
Anything else that you saw? Were you there for the second hit by the plane?
About 10 minutes later, the second building went off.
Did you see it?
Yes, I saw it. It just blew up. A big explosion. People started running. It was just chaos everywhere. People jumping out. People just kept jumping and jumping and jumping. And you could still see they were alive because they were flailing around.
The FBI has already stepped in to investigate. It could be possibly a terrorist strike.
It could be. It could be, because the first one went off, and then 10 minutes later, this just blew up out of nowhere.
Hard to think that would just be accidental.
No, I don't think it would be accidental.
Back it up, folks.
Well, there you've got a glimpse in the background of what was then one of the towers of the World Trade Center. Both the main towers have now collapsed less than 2 hours after an aircraft which had been hijacked from Boston was flown directly into one of the towers. Jane Stanley in New York.
Hello, Nick.
Yes, Jane. Tell us what you have, where you are at the moment in New York City.
It's complete and utter chaos, panic and terror. People cannot believe that this has happened. They watched the initial events unfold even less than 2 hours ago, and now one of the enduring symbols of New York is no more. The 2 towers of the World Trade Center have collapsed. People are desperately trying to find their family members, but the telephones largely don't work. All cellular phones are knocked out. There were 50,000 people working in the World Trade Center. Many of them, the majority of them, had arrived at work this morning, and people are unaware of many of their whereabouts.
Now, Jane, let's just put this into, it's terrible enough at the moment, let's put it into even worse perspective. What we're talking about there is essentially the scenes we're seeing at the moment covering the whole of the Wall Street area and beyond. And much of American business orientates around this whole area into which the rubble of the World Trade Center has now collapsed, along with telecommunications and who knows what else.
Indeed, and you can imagine some of that rubble falling even at the first impact and the second impact on the trade towers just before 9 o'clock in the morning, New York time, and a very busy time. A lot of people already in their offices in that area, and the streets packed with people. You can barely get down those streets on a busy day, and the rubble was falling 110 floors, and people were falling as well, as they were desperately, some people trying to jump out of the windows of the World Trade Center as as it was on fire. Now those buildings are no more. New York's famous skyline doesn't look the same. I don't think New York feels the same place. People are incredibly frightened of what might happen next. They're hearing stories from Washington, of course, where there's been the attack on the Pentagon. Now we're hearing of a car bomb at the State Department. They're asking what next. And people want to go. They want to get out of this city. All the bridges and tunnels to Manhattan are closed. The airports are closed. There's a feeling of America almost under siege here. Ordinary people just don't know what to do.
It's almost as if someone had written a film script and no one would ever have believed it before.
You couldn't have put it better, actually, Nick, because when I first saw this first thing this morning, I couldn't believe it. And I couldn't believe anything so horrific and so astonishing as a sight to be seen. And then, of course, this whole series of events has just unfolded more and more. Clearly a very well-planned, very well-coordinated attack. The hijacking of the American airliners flight, we now know, Flight 11 from Boston to New York. No one knows how many passengers yet, that hasn't been confirmed, were on that plane, the plane that crashed into the World Trade Center towers. I mean, it's almost Orson Welles, isn't it?
We're now seeing the courthouse down in Lower Manhattan, Jane. Are you able, I know you've been talking to us and our other BBC colleagues elsewhere, but can you give us a sense of what the radio stations and television stations are telling people what to do now, and the police?
Well, the police were just desperately trying to get people evacuated out of the immediate area. I mean, clearly fearing that the World Trade Center Twin Towers would collapse, and indeed they were proved right. And another building next to the World Trade Center has also collapsed. But I haven't been able to listen to the local stations. I'm afraid the local television stations are running this in very American style as a drama. I think they're just going from minute to minute as we are. It's, as I said, it's less than 2 hours since this first attack, and New York just devastated, and scenes of terror and devastation in Washington as well.
Jane, we'll be back with you as soon as we can be for news of what the police and others are now warning about what people should do in New York, both in New York and obviously beyond into New York State. Let's now go south to Washington, where the Pentagon has already been hit by a hijacked aircraft, where I'm joined again by Stephen Sveach. Stephen, a car bomb outside the State Department, many of the agencies being evacuated. What's the latest?
Yes, car bomb outside the State Department, and on a bigger scale, this attack on the Pentagon. Now, I was talking earlier about the airliner, it seems, having come down just beside the Pentagon, but I've just been looking at pictures from the ABC network, which show part of the Pentagon apparently having collapsed, and that part of the building also on fire. So it seems that part of the Pentagon has indeed been hit by something. If not by that airline, then by something. Too soon to talk about another explosion, but again, the magnitude of what's going on in Washington becoming a little bit bigger, I think.
Now, just stand by, because news agencies, we have to say there is, I think, the second tower collapsing, the World Trade Center tower collapsing. It did so about half an hour ago. That is in New York. And as we watch again with horror that image, wondering how many people are up there, how many people are underneath, how many people may have survived, how many people from the rescue services were underneath, fire tenders and so on, I have to report to you that more detail is coming in of the plane which we gather has crashed in western Pennsylvania. The AP news agency is reporting that a large plane, believed to be a 767, a Boeing 767, crashed at about 10 o'clock local time. That's about 50 minutes ago, about 8 miles east of Jennerstown. That's according to the 911, which is the emergency service dispatchers, reported by local television stations. The airport is about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, and that is the latest we have of what appears, from what we know at this moment, to be a fourth plane, which appears to have been hijacked with what one has to describe now as some kind of evil intent. Now, What's important to remember is that about an hour and 20 minutes ago, the Federal Aviation Administration, which administers all airspace inside and over North America and certainly the United States, grounded all planes, issued a nationwide order that all planes should be grounded and none should take off, fearing, of course, that something much worse, if that's at all possible, might be threatening. So there we have the scene of downtown, the southern tip of Manhattan. On the left, well, now you can see the human cost for anyone, whether you're a civilian who tried to get to work or someone from the emergency services. These images coming in, and we switch immediately from New York to the Pentagon, where we've just heard from Stephen that part of the Pentagon, that above ground, was demolished, has been demolished, has collapsed. Just for those of you joining us, wondering if you're watching an unreal scene or a film, this is actually reality in Washington. There, the image of the Pentagon, the Defense Department, across the river from the White House. That's the image on the left. And on the right, although we're jumping around, just let me finish what was happening in the Pentagon. A large plane apparently hit the helicopter. There we have it, the helicopter pad, which is just outside, located outside the Pentagon. The five-sided building that is the nerve center of the American defense establishment and the enormous assets of the American superpower. Just to confirm, this, as far as we know, was the third plane which was hijacked and was then flown directly in to the Pentagon. The second and first planes were involved in incidents around the World Trade Center. One of them was hijacked, and the image showed the plane, an American Airlines plane, en route from Boston to Los Angeles, American Airlines 11, flying through the World Trade Center. There is that appalling, horrifying image. The kind of thing we only thought up to now was probably in the imagination of film directors. But this is, I have to underline, reality. These are pictures coming in as I speak, and pictures, it looks to me like downtown Washington on Lafayette Square, across from the White House. There, if I see correctly, you can see one of the main entrances across Lafayette Square, where a large number of anti-terrorist devices, enormous pillars, and other devices have been erected in recent years to stop car bombs being driven at high speed into the White House. There it looks to me like the top of the White House. And this, the fountains inside the main garden. These pictures are coming to you, I think, if I read them correctly, from just outside the White House. Of course, the White House literally within 3 or 4 miles of Reagan Airport, Ronald Reagan Airport, formerly National Airport, which is the way in and out for congressmen, all the big businessmen, and so on.
I'm praying for all of us. I am.
This video is arriving at BBC World Raw, and so we're just giving and transmitting it to you as it comes in. Images around the White House, around Lafayette Square. The White House, we gather, has been evacuated, although I think we did see some Secret Service officials on top. Now, one of the interesting things, of course, is that a few years ago, there was a man with a light plane who tried to fly in to the White House.
Not just for my convenience, but for probably the hundreds of people that have already died. It's shocking.
But I'm frustrated with the country as a whole that we don't take a strong stand against terrorism. This had to happen. As long as we're going to let people off the hook in the Mideast, Iraq, Iran, and places like that, when they blow up buildings in Beirut and places like that, if we don't take a strong stand, this is going to continue. And it was just a matter of time.
That raises an important point. Terrorism has finally come to the United States in a way which American officials have long feared and dreaded. It's the doomsday scenario. It always seemed to stop at the American Eastern Seaboard. It always happened elsewhere. And now that is the very human reaction of someone in downtown Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, to what has happened. Now, although it seems a bit unreal to even read this to you, because of the horror of what we're seeing in the Pentagon and we've been seeing at the World Trade Center, and downtown, there we have it, downtown Manhattan, the southern tip, all the blocks in southern Manhattan. We were hearing from Jane Stanley a short time ago, the place paralyzed by disaster, human tragedy, and the US Securities and Exchange Commission Chairman Harvey Pitt has said that the US securities market has decided not to open for trading after the aircraft crashed into buildings in New York and Washington. He did say in a statement, and I quote, that trading will resume as soon as is practicable to do so. But one has to underline that much of Wall Street and the dealers in the United States. Right, we're going to Yasser Arafat, who is now
President
speaking
Bush, to his
live.
government, to the American people for this terrible act. We are completely shocked, unbelievable.
Thank you. There we had commiserations, expressions of regret from a very somber looking, that from the Reuters news agency in Jerusalem. Yasser Arafat being interviewed, offering a few words of horror himself at what has happened. And there we see, just to underline what Harvey Pitt, the US Securities and Exchange Commission chairman, has said a few minutes ago, that normal trading will resume as soon as it's practicable to do so. But underneath all that smoke down there is what we loosely call in two words Wall Street, which is the heart of the financial services of the United States.
Reuters television. What do you think about what you're seeing?
It's just awful. I mean, it's incredible. It's just, I can't imagine how many people are dead. Just the most amazing situation. It's awful. I hope they can figure out a way to get to terrorists, because it's got to stop. Amazing. So I don't know, not much is being said about people on the ground, but that was a hell of an explosion when the building collapsed. It appeared to collapse. I mean, think about it. You know, one tower of the World Trade Center collapsing on top of all the people on the ground. So I wish they would come up with some kind of thoughts about what's going on the ground. Millions, I mean thousands of people, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands are going to be touched by this. So it's the worst. Never seen anything like it. I mean, Kansas City, less than 200 people. This is going to be thousands.
Where are you from?
I'm from New Jersey.
Okay, and what's your name, please?
Karen Furman.
How do you spell it?
F-U-R-M-A-N.
These are the very human reactions of what you're seeing in front of you. Can I just confirm now that according to United Airlines, an official in Paris said one of the two planes that crashed into what were the two twin towers of New York's landmark World Trade Center was a Boeing 737 from United Airlines.
And one World Trade Center hit somewhere on the 67th floor. I was on the 56th.
And was it chaos trying to come down the steps?
Yes.
What was it like? Describe it for us.
Everybody was on top of each other trying to come down, and then somebody finally calmed the crowd down to get them to come down the stairs in an orderly fashion and get them out of the building.
And what just happened now?
The building just came down. One of them, I don't know which one came down. I don't know if it was one or two.
What did you start doing when that happened?
Running. Like everybody else, but trying to calm the people down while they were running, because I told them this is how people get hurt. Is that when they start trying to, you know, get out of the way, and it's just crazy. I just thank God I made it down from 56.
What's your name?
My name is Debbie.
Debbie, your last name?
Troy.
Troy, and where do you work?
I work at...
Now, just to confirm, let's clarify where we've got to. We were heard that two United Airlines planes, had been hijacked and hit the tower. We now know that one of them was American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles. The second was United Airlines Boeing 737. Now, joining me here in the studio is Stephen Simon, who was a counterterrorism expert. You still are, Stephen Simon, and you were in President Clinton's National Security Council until 1999. You were planning, you were assessing intelligence, fearing something one day like this might happen in your National Security Council. Is this the doomsday scenario?
Nick, this is about as close to the doomsday scenario as could be contemplated. I'm a bit shook up at the moment. This is a devastating thing. But yes, attack by air was contemplated. It's obviously an extremely difficult thing, if not an impossible thing, to counter.
Okay. Now, were you expecting that one day something like this would happen? Did you have the systems in place to ever stop this? Were they planned for?
The question really, Nick, is how one stops it. It is actually, and under these circumstances, perversely true that it is illegal to destroy a civilian aircraft in flight. It simply cannot be done. So even if it were known that these planes were on a trajectory headed into these buildings, it would have been a problematic scenario.
Right. Stephen, wait one moment, because we can go live to Washington, to Johnny Diamond in Washington, one of our correspondents there. Johnny, can you just update me on what you know about what is happening around the White House?
Well, what we understand now is that much of official Washington has been evacuated. This is because of what have been reports of 3 explosions in the US Capitol. One, which we have obviously confirmed, you've almost certainly seen pictures of. The Pentagon has been attacked. A plane has gone into one side of it. Part of the building has collapsed. There are flames visible in the rest of the building. There are unconfirmed reports of a car bomb outside the State Department, which obviously houses the US Foreign Affairs Department, and also reports of an explosion on the US Capitol, which houses the US Congress. Much of official Washington is now abandoned, evacuated, effectively paralyzed. Staff have been sent home, and security measures are being put in across the US Capitol now. President Bush was supposed to be going back to the White House, journeying back from Florida when he heard about the World Trade Center. That won't be happening anymore. The White House has been evacuated. The security service is patrolling the grounds. We also hear, as you've probably heard, that all flights have been grounded within the United States. Having said that, there are reports, and I can stress there are all kinds of reports now going around, that a second plane is apparently heading for Washington. Completely unconfirmed report, but one which, as you can imagine, is most unhappy news for the authorities struggling to control the situation here in the nation's capital.
Right. Thank you very much, Johnny. And just to underline, Stephen Simon, who worked in the National Security Council on this very issue, said there is no ability to actually shoot down a civilian aircraft. This is what he just told me a moment ago. He's sitting in the studio with me. Let's now go to Rob Watson, who's up Pennsylvania Avenue from the White House in Congress. Rob, go ahead. What's the scene there?
Well, scenes of complete chaos, really, and total gridlock, because, as Johnny Diamond was saying, all the federal buildings have been evacuated. That includes Capitol Hill, it includes all the government buildings, and of course people have just been turfed out onto the streets. Add to that, of course, all the emergency vehicles headed in all directions here in Washington, some to the Pentagon, some here to where I am, just near Capitol Hill, and I think you get some sense of the scene. I think also the streets are packed with people, everybody, of course, talking about what has happened. They seem stunned by this attack on America's capital and the attack just up the road in New York City. People just not knowing what to make of it.
Is there provision in Congress for this kind of evacuation at high speed, for something like this?
Well, it seemed to work pretty effectively, because I was standing just outside Congress when I heard a very loud explosion. Within minutes, the Capitol seemed to be completely evacuated. I spoke to a number of people who worked for Congress. They were streaming out in quite an orderly way, although, of course, looking rather shocked at what they'd seen and at what they'd heard. But I think the evacuation was pretty efficient.
Right, Rob Watson, thanks for joining us from Congress. Now, Stephen Simon is still with me, formerly in the National Security Council until 1999, dealing with this single issue of counterterrorism for President Clinton. What kind of provisions are in place in central Washington for this kind of event, Stephen Simon?
There are extensive provisions for evacuating official Washington. The targets, the chief targets, which are among those that have been attacked in this assault, are fairly hard targets. There is essentially no way to...
You mean physically hard targets?
Physically hard targets, yes.
Reinforced,
which is to
hardened.
say they're difficult to attack. The White House is within an 18-acre compound.
But here we're seeing the Pentagon there, smoke rising, part of the building's destroyed. How much of the Pentagon is being destroyed here? How much is below ground?
Well, it seems to me it would be quite difficult to get very close to the Pentagon with a vehicle. It must have been an airplane.
This was a plane. This was a plane which flew into the helicopter pad. Probably a jumbo, we're told, or a large aircraft.
Well, it would have caused significant damage, but bear in mind that the Pentagon is made out of cast concrete, which would be fairly resistant to an explosion, but there is a lot of glass.
And how much deeper does that go, the Pentagon? I mean, there's, what, 6 or 7 floors, aren't there, below ground?
No, the Pentagon has a couple of basement floors. It doesn't go terribly deep underground. The sensitive facilities are all underground, of course, and I would think would be resistant to attack.
But tell me about the White House, the executive buildings around it, Lafayette Square, the Treasury Building, Congress.
Well, these are buildings that are fairly close together. They're large buildings. The White House itself, as I was saying, is in an 18-acre compound. It's in the center of it. Senior officials who were there, including the vice president, who I understand were there, would have been evacuated immediately into an underground vault, which is completely self-sustaining for a long period of time, and it's quite secure. The facility would have been locked down. The Secret Service counter-assault teams would have been activated. It would have been very, very difficult for anybody to follow up an attack by airplane with some kind of ground assault. But an attack by airplane is definitely possible, and there was one, if you recall.
I do indeed.
It must have been 6 years ago or thereabouts, a small private plane.
And the air defenses and the radar were found to be wanting, and people on duty were not as vigilant as they should have been.
Well, actually, in all honesty, I don't recall who was at fault. I do know that it's very difficult to do something about an airplane once it gets close. Again, an airplane can't really be shot down. Just can't do it.
Are you saying there are legal instruments in the United States which forbid any commercial civilian aircraft to be shot down?
Yes. And,
despite all the films which suggest it could happen.
Yes. Well, official Washington pays close attention to those films. They're quite dramatic. Back in '96 in the Olympics, there was a good deal of concern that the Olympic area would have been the subject of an airplane attack. And at that time, security officials reviewed all the regulations and laws quite carefully and were dissuaded at the end of the day from any idea that it would be possible actually to shoot down an aircraft that, for example, was en route to an Olympic facility with the purpose of bombing it or crashing into it.
Right. Stand by, Stephen, for one moment. There have been a series of attacks on the nerve centers of the U.S. administration. 2 planes, civilian aircraft, passenger aircraft, have crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York. And then a short while later, another aircraft appears to have crashed near the Pentagon in Washington. Both of the 110-story World Trade Center towers have collapsed. Tens of thousands of people work in those buildings. It was the rush hour in the morning. There was also a plane crash of what is believed to be a Boeing 767 near a town about 80 kilometers southeast of Pittsburgh. Well, in many government buildings across the United States, including the White House and Capitol, all staff have now been evacuated. The Federal Aviation Authority has grounded all planes for and closed all airports. There's no word yet on the extent of injuries and deaths in these attacks. Here's an update from Mike Woolridge.
This was the second of the explosions. A plane comes in from the right of the picture and appears to be about to pass behind the South Tower. Next comes a huge explosion with debris showering out from the tower and down towards the streets below as the upper floors are immediately obscured by the billowing smoke. By now, the other tower, the North Tower, was already ablaze at the top as well, after being struck by another plane. Eyewitnesses said the planes made no attempt to swerve as they flew towards the buildings. New Yorkers assumed they were reliving the 1993 attack on this, one of the most famous landmarks of the capitalist world. But this was to be infinitely more audacious. There was pandemonium and panic in the streets around the Trade Center. With good reason, as it turned out, for within the hour, one of the huge 110-storey towers collapsed, and the surrounding area resembled a war zone.
The first one we didn't see, but my co-worker saw the plane hit number 2 World Trade, and we just saw people just falling, jumping out the window. So that's about it.
We were looking at the fire from a distance, and then we saw a few bodies, people just flying out the window. I saw at least four bodies coming through the window. It's a sad day.
But it seemed that with every passing minute there was news that heralded terrorist action on an even bigger scale. The reports of aircraft being hijacked, and then this, a plane crashing onto a helicopter landing pad close to the Pentagon in Washington, the heart of the US defense establishment. This was the scene afterwards. Later came reports of a car bomb outside the State Department. The White House was evacuated, and all planes across the country were grounded. But New York had not seen the last of the apocalyptic events there. The second of the World Trade Center towers collapsed, burying yet more of the city's financial district under rubble. It's still impossible to calculate the number of victims of these unbelievable, virtually simultaneous attacks. Mike Wooldridge, BBC News.
President George W. Bush was in Florida, and he had this to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a difficult moment for America. I, unfortunately, will be going back to Washington after my remarks. Secretary of Rod Page and Lieutenant Governor will take the podium and discuss education. I do want to thank the folks here at Booker Elementary School for their hospitality. Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
Well, despite earlier reports, the Democratic for the Liberation of Palestine have denied being behind the attack.
The DFLP has no relation to this accident or this incident. We have always been against terroristic actions, against civilian targets, and especially outside the occupied territories. But in spite of that, we deny our responsibility, but we call upon the American administration to review their attitude and their policy towards the Palestinian question, because this policy arouses the anger and the hatred of our people and of all Arab and Islamic peoples, and it's liable actually to harm the interests of the United States in our region, and therefore it has to be reviewed.
Let's now go to Washington for the latest there to Stephen Speech. Stephen.
Well, the latest here in Washington is that a plane has crashed into the Pentagon, or at least into part of the Pentagon. Part of the building has collapsed and is on fire. We also know there's been a bomb explosion outside the State Department, a car bomb. Government buildings have been evacuated. Federal employees have flooded out into the streets. The US Capitol, the Congress building, also evacuated. And meanwhile, of course, in New York, a tragedy on what seems to be a terrible scale. 2 planes have crashed into both the towers of the World Trade Center, and those 2 towers have collapsed, and it's feared with heavy loss of life.
And the scene across the nation, what's the atmosphere?
I think an atmosphere of great shock. what's happened throughout the morning here has been that one piece of bad news has followed another. So first of all, we had the attack on the World Trade Center, then developments here in Washington, and now these reports, which now have been confirmed on at least 2 news agencies, that a 747 jetliner has crashed on a flight from Chicago to New York. It's crashed in Pennsylvania. So I think a sense of great shock, people simply almost unable to believe what's going on, and a great sense of vulnerability and a sense that there is somebody out there, wherever it is, who is determined to attack US targets.
And we are getting reports, unconfirmed at this stage, that there is somewhere up there another aircraft which is heading somewhere. Stephen?
I can't confirm that. What I can tell you is that all transatlantic flights have been diverted to Canada, so no flights from across the Atlantic or from coming in to the United States at the moment. All US commercial flights have been grounded, and therefore, if there is a plane out there, it will stick out like a sore thumb, and I think the authorities will be pretty worried.
There, the scene at the World Trade Center, and I have to tell you, Stephen, as the tower collapses there, the most horrendous image. And we have to think of the people who were in there and around the bottom of the building at that time, as all that rubble, masonry, steel collapsed, as you are watching it there.
Yes, I think perhaps the one element of hope, I was listening earlier to the people who had been inside the building. It seems that at least a lot of the people who were inside the building on the lower floors were able to make their escape after the plane attack and before the buildings collapsed. But of course, there would have been people perhaps still trapped in there, and people on the ground who may have been hit. And of course, it's quite possible, according to at least one TV network here, many people on board those 2 planes as well.
Stephen Sveach in Washington, thank you. You can see behind this eyewitness the towers still standing. One of the towers, those towers are no more after the impact of the 2 hijacked aircraft, both within about an hour and a half, collapsed to the ground in South Manhattan.
People jumping out. People just kept jumping and jumping and jumping. And you could still see they were alive because they were flailing around.
Now, just let me clarify something that Stephen said about transatlantic flights being diverted to Canada. It has just been reported by the Reuters news agency that Canada has now shut all airports. That's according to the Transport Ministry in Ottawa. Now, Stephen Simon, you were in the White House for 6 years. Your job was counterterrorism for President Clinton until 1999. Here you are sitting horrified watching all this. I have to ask you, was any of this preventable? Or, after all, think back to Oklahoma City. The initial assumption was this was terrorism with a Middle East connection. It was found to be Stephen McVeigh. Should we assume this is Middle East terrorism?
There are a number of possible candidates, Nick. Middle East terrorists are one of them. One thing that's obvious from this attack is that the terrorists wanted to destroy symbols of American power, authority, prestige. Leadership targets, as well as buildings that signified the financial might of the United States.
I'm talking about the coordination here, Stephen.
I just need to complete this point, which is that Timothy McVeigh represented exactly this motivation. Now, having said that, so does Osama bin Laden. And what's striking about this attack is that it was against several targets and it was coordinated in a simultaneous fashion. This is right out of bin Laden's playbook. And it's also very consistent with bin Laden's rhetoric.
But let me just press you on this, Stephen, because in the end we are talking about 4 planes apparently hijacked in a coordinated way. That's more than Timothy McVeigh, isn't it?
It is more than Timothy McVeigh. All I'm saying is that jumping to the conclusion that this is Islamic terrorism is unwarranted at this point, as tempting as it is. And I can give you reasons why it's tempting.
Please do.
I was talking about bin Laden's rhetoric. It is extremely forceful and uncompromising. A videotape was recently released. It was a hodgepodge of videotapes previously made of bin Laden. But it was assembled and distributed not long ago, and in it, bin Laden reiterated his call for jihad against the United States and reiterated his determination to strike out against American power and arrogance as he perceives these things. Secondly, there is a determination here to cause large casualties. Now, this was clearly a concern of Timothy McVeigh's, but it's also a chief concern of the groups that have gathered themselves around bin Laden to target the United States. These groups are looking to cause huge numbers of casualties, and they've tried it on a number of occasions. They've tried it against the World Trade Center, in fact. So there's another reason why one might think, well, this is in bin Laden's playbook. And then there's the coordination that we discussed a minute ago. When he attacked the embassies in East Africa, it was done in a coordinated way, and it was actually very impressive to counterterrorism officials.
And of course, some of those who were charged with the incident in Nairobi were arraigned in a court in Manhattan.
They were arraigned in a court in Manhattan. Well, it's interesting, actually, that you mentioned that court in Manhattan, because the transcripts of the East Africa bombing trial reveal connections between Ramzi Youssef, the conspirator who attempted to destroy the towers a number of years ago, with Osama bin Laden. Apparently, there was a connection there.
When you were sitting in the National Security Council, and you've said half an hour ago when you first joined us that this really is the scenario from hell, the doomsday scenario that none of you ever wanted to even contemplate, even watching it in a movie. Did you ever, before you left in 1999, see similar intent where you were able to steer the terrorists away, stop terrorism before it happened? In other words, you got wind of it.
Yeah, there was one case in particular which was extremely frightening and thwarted only at the last minute, and that was an attempt to destroy as